Thank you, Louise, for that fascinating inside look. And I am so excited to take you behind the scenes and continue the conversation as we look at some other brand stories. And hopefully, it will give you some insight on what we're facing with the so called dupe economy. Okay, let's get started with a story. A college student who's struggling with tuition learns that she can make money posting on social media. So she shares her fashion choices every day, and soon her account gains tremendous traction. And it's not long before she has thousands of followers, and she's making over 6 figures a year in affiliate income. So to celebrate, she buys her dream designer handbag, and she posts it to her account. She's so proud of what she's achieved. And her followers, they also want the look. So she decides to post some links to replica items. And in her mind, this is harmless because she reasons everyone's doing it, right? Until her account's frozen. And that lucrative influencer income that she's been depending on, it's gone. And then comes the proverbial knock on her door. It's a lawsuit filed in federal court for trademark infringement and the promotion of counterfeit goods. And the plaintiff is the very platform that she thought had made all of her dreams come true. Now we're going to shift scenes to Paris, Sotheby's auction house. And it's an exciting moment because the original Birkin handbag is about to go up for auction. It's decades old and it's visibly tattered. So the audience thinks this collectible is going to achieve $1 to $2 million at sale. Instead, the hammer falls at $10 million. And this handbag becomes the most valuable fashion item ever sold at auction in Europe. Two stories, same industry. One shows us the dark side of the dupe economy, and the other, the enduring and true value of authenticity. By way of background, I'm Elizabeth Millian, and I'm a trademark attorney, and I've dedicated my practice to helping businesses protect distinctive and valuable assets. My purpose today is to take you behind all the rumors, the headlines, and we're going to look at some of the lawsuits to help get an appreciation of the true cost of dupes. So when I was preparing for today, I was thinking about a line from one of my favorite books, and it has to do with humankind's enduring fascination with why we love beautiful items. So, preparing for today, this quote, "The history of the world is the history of desire." And in fact, desire has shaped what we buy and why we buy for thousands of years. For example, the ancient Romans were famous for copying Greek marble statues. They would take statues and stamp them with fake marks from long dead masters. And if you ask why the deception, well, simple, to cash in on the prestige reputation of others. When we fast forward to the 18th century, we come to what's called paste jewelry. And these were made to mimic diamonds and other gemstones. And they were not outright forgeries and fakes, but they did allow people to display the look of wealth without the cost. And so when we come to today, dupes are still center stage. And they're so mainstream, they have their own hashtag. And TikTokers will promote fashion items, beauty items, just to name a few. And they do so proudly and without stigma. But the underlying psychology behind all of this is the same: access and aspiration. So here's the tension. If desire is timeless, then why are dupes so important in 2025? And the answer, it's not surprising. It's sitting in your pockets, on your devices, it's social media. It's that instant global reach of channels like TikTok and Instagram, not to mention our always on and convenient e-commerce channels. And this makes protecting authenticity urgent and imperative. Let's start by looking at counterfeit goods. We're all familiar. And as you know, counterfeits are not a gray area. It's not a debatable area. It's a crime. And in the United States alone, the amount of goods seized has soared from 1.3 billion in 2020 to 5.4 billion in 2024. When I think of that number, $5.4 billion, it's really astonishing. And here are some more statistics. Handbags and accessories are consistently among the top categories that are seized by customs. And this is even though offenders will face up to 10 years in prison and $2 million in fines, as well as seizure and destruction of their illicit goods. That's the good news. The bad news is that the quality of counterfeits is just getting better every day. 2 years ago, the New York Times featured this phenomenon when they profiled super fakes. And these are replicas that are so convincing, buyers will knowingly spend thousands to purchase them. And don't let anyone tell you that this is a so-called victimless crime, because it's not. I want you to consider the following scenario. A knowing purchaser goes out to get a super fake and spends $3,000 on this designer bag because she knows that if she could get the genuine item, it retails for about $12,000 in the store. Later, this purchaser somehow ends up consigning this bag to a high-end resale boutique. And this bag is so good that the store is fooled into thinking the item is genuine. And it resells this bag to a collector, an innocent collector, for $27,000. In other words, the super fake was so believable that both sophisticated buyers and sellers thought they had the authentic product. And in legal terms, that mistaken belief is called post-sale confusion. And we call it that because the harm occurs not just at the time of purchase, but long afterwards as well. And there's not a super fake in the world that's as impeccable as the original product. And so inevitably, super fakes, you start to see some issues like discoloration or stitches coming loose. And the public now mistakenly associates this subpar quality with the authentic designer brand. And that will undercut the brand's reputation. And these super fakes also dilute the market, which impacts the scarcity of the genuine items. We started with Hermes. Let's go back for a second. This company has a tremendously valuable reputation, and it's known worldwide for the quality of its craftsmanship as well as the scarcity of its goods. And because Hermes carefully controls its brand, it does fuel desire and demand for its products, and it's able to command record prices even in economically challenging times. So if you ask yourself, is this a victimless crime? It's just the opposite. Counterfeit goods truly erode consumer trust, and they do negatively impact our market. Now, all of us were students at one time. I know I remember it well. And I want to take a moment to talk to you about fairness. I want you to imagine yourself in this position of the student. She has been studying all semester. She gets good grades, and she's diligently preparing for that final exam. But her classmate decides investing that level of work is totally foolish. And that classmate wants a shortcut to success. So they sit next to our hard worker, they peek over her shoulder, and they copy all of her answers. Now, should the copier get an A? Of course not. That would undermine the values that we hold sacred of hard work, integrity, and honesty. And that's the problem with dupes. Dupes are often described as free riding on the hard work that brands put in, the hard work of research, development, and marketing. And much like the student who copies answers, producers of dupes, people feel are reaping the benefits and the rewards without doing the hard work. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at how the law views these cases and where they draw the line. For our first case, we have Louis Vuitton versus Sandra Ling, and this is from 2021. It's relatively recent. And this case falls under the concept of upcycling, which on its face, upcycling looks like a creative form of repurposing because it's reducing landfill by refashioning and extending the life of an original item. And That sounds pretty great, right? What could be objectionable about sustainability? Well, in this case, let's reframe upcycling as it applies to these facts. Here, upcycling didn't just mean repurposing, it literally meant materially altering someone else's product, already protected by exclusive IP rights, and doing so without permission. The defendant dismantled purportedly authentic pre-owned Louis Vuitton products and then reused their protected logos and designs to create her own new merchandise. And she sold it under her own name. So simply, this was not just ordinary reuse, it was use without authorization. According to the case record, investigators found over 750 items on display with Louis Vuitton trademarks that were offered under the defendant's name for sale. And she received multiple cease and desist letters from Louis Vuitton. She acknowledged these letters, and she kept on selling these items. So ultimately, Louis Vuitton was awarded $603,000, and the defendant has been permanently enjoined from selling anything that includes a Louis Vuitton logo. So upcycling, it is a compelling idea, but you do have to be careful because you can face legal risks. Our second case is Chanel versus What Goes Around Comes Around. And this is a very well-known reseller of luxury goods. You may have seen their stores, their boutiques before. And they sold Chanel branded items in their stores as well as online. And Chanel sued them. Chanel said, "You are selling counterfeits and you are also infringing, and your advertising and your marketing is creating the impression that you have an official affiliation with our prestige brand." Now, from the legal standpoint, the resale of genuine goods is generally allowed under the first sale doctrine, which is if you buy the authentic item, you can resell it. But there are some important limits. You cannot misrepresent what you're selling, and you cannot market your business in a way that suggests you're endorsed or sponsored by the brand if that's not the case. And this case tested all of those boundaries. After 7 years of litigation, a jury agreed with Chanel. They found that What Goes Around was liable for trademark infringement, false association, and they awarded $4 million in damages. And as of this spring, Chanel was pursuing $6.7 million in attorney's fees on top of that award. So the first sale doctrine, it's not a free pass. Now, here's the point where I have to tell you about a case where the more established brand, which is the brand with earlier rights, unfortunately did not prevail. And I do so because it's important to understand that litigation is rarely a straight line. This is the Benefit versus e.l.f. Cosmetics case. You have Benefit, which is a company with an award-winning reputation for high-quality products, and it launched an innovative product. It was a curling mascara that they called Roller Lash. And Roller Lash was super popular, $29, hundreds of millions of sales. When this lawsuit was filed, it had achieved $300 million in sales. So Roller Lash developed a special brush feature, and they called that the hook and roll, and they had trademarks for both of those. So this is actually the product packaging, and you see the distinctive pink and black color as well as the special brush feature. So what did e.l.f. do? Well, e.l.f. decided to bring out a $7 dupe, which it called Lash and Roll. So when you look at the names and when you're listening to the names, I'm wondering what you think. Do you think it sounds alike, or do you think it looks alike? Here's the e.l.f. product in the pink and the black with that special feature. And here they are side by side. So if you saw these two products in a store, would you as a consumer be confused about which was the prestige product and which was the duplicate product? And Benefit argued consumers will be confused, and the court disagreed. The court ruled that similarity on its own is not sufficient. You had to also show that confusion was probable and not just a hypothetical. So if this result feels surprising, it's completely understandable, particularly when we remember that a keystone of trademark law is to prevent consumer confusion and not just to respond to that. So that being said, courts are creatures of procedure. And when they're looking at these cases, they are looking at a huge amount of facts and factors. Their analysis is very specific and very nuanced. So in my opinion, we shouldn't see benefit as permission to borrow anyone else's IP. The better understanding is to look at it from the following lens, which is enforcement is complex. And it's not always a given that an established brand is going to prevail. We have another Chanel case, which is Chanel versus The RealReal. And The RealReal is a California-based consignment retailer where consumers send the company their goods, and The RealReal will conduct a process of inspection and authentication. And if items pass this process, they are listed for sale. So what was the problem? Well, The RealReal marketed itself as selling only 100% authentic goods. Problems also. So Chanel sued them and said, this is false. Only we can authenticate our products. Only we can make the determination of what is authentic and what is a fake. No one in your organization has the qualifications necessary to authenticate our products. So from Chanel's opinion, The RealReal was actually engaged in false advertising. And Chanel also argued that The RealReal had made statements that were going to mislead consumers into thinking that they were endorsing them or that there was an affiliation between the two. And again, we've heard about this today. That's a problem for brands, and it was certainly a problem for Chanel because your value is very specific to you as the company. It's what we call goodwill. So what is goodwill? It's your reputation. It's the consumer trust the brand invests in, the loyalty of its consumers, and also the marketplace recognition. All of those things give trademarks their real value. So to preserve that value, companies do have to be diligent. They must protect their name and their images in the marketplace. So when we think about, is this a huge problem? We know it is. And to look at the scale in a little more detail, I thought we should take a look at Amazon, because Amazon spends more than $1 billion a year on IP enforcement. It's been said they have 15,000 people just in their department looking at this, where they combine artificial intelligence, human investigators, as well as partnerships with law enforcement. So if Amazon needs $1 billion a year just to deal with IP issues, how can other businesses possibly keep up? And I think that's a fair question, because under US trademark law, ignoring infringement on your IP is problematic, and trademark owners have to police their marks. So I'm sure you've heard the phrase use it or lose it. When it comes to trademarks, it's use it, police it, enforcement, or lose it. And the need to enforce is a reality, because if you don't enforce, you will erode your rights. I like to describe this sometimes to clients as a target on a bullseye. And so what you want is that layers of protection. The enforcement is going to build wide and protective circles around the center. And if you let infringers go unchecked, those circles will shrink. And then all you'll be left with is what's left in the middle. And that erosion, that matters. It will weaken your market position, it devalues your brand, and then when you do try to enforce, infringers will point to the sea of third-party use as evidence against you. And if you completely neglect enforcement, your registration can be challenged, and you might also have it canceled outright. So it's not just a problem for brand owners, it's also an issue for marketplaces, platforms like Amazon or eBay, because they know that if they have infringing listings, they can also open the door to what's called contributory trademark infringement claims, which is why we do see brands and platforms investing heavily in brand protection, not only to reduce risk, but to preserve consumer trust. So, in other words, enforcement is the price you pay to preserve your value. So, if you do not have a $1 billion a year budget to deal with IP enforcement, can you credibly enforce your IP? And of course, the answer is yes. And I'd like to suggest some tactics. Number one, make IP a priority. And you want to register your marks early. You want to monitor your brand portfolios proactively, and all with the understanding that by doing so, you have the tools to control and protect your brand position. And we heard today a lot about the exciting changes in AI and what is possible today. So there's really no excuse, in my opinion, not to use the AI, because we have tools now that can scan these images, monitor keywords, and automate takedowns, which puts businesses in a position to protect their identities and remain in control of their brands more effectively than ever before. Then, enforcement works best as a multi-pronged effort. And so when we understand how to integrate AI, we understand that technology will offer unmatched speed and reach, and the human oversight ensures judgment and context. And then enforcement. When it surfaces, your response matters. So whether you are in a courtroom or the court of public opinion, you do want your actions to send a clear message, which is infringing on your brand is a risk that is not worth taking. And I'd like to suggest in number 5 that you do have an opportunity to showcase your brand protection efforts by making them a visible part of your consumer messaging. You can equip and educate customers to choose it with confidence. And as we know, the bottom line is brand protection has gone beyond mere takedowns. It's about safeguarding trust, protecting your revenue, and staying in control of your brand. Now, I want to widen the lens a little bit further and connect this to the bigger picture. We know that brand protection doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is part of a larger conversation. And I want to talk about sustainability. And I specifically want to talk about fashion because fashion is said to be responsible for 6% of global greenhouse gases and up to 35% of ocean microplastics. So, it's also said that we discard 120 million metric tons of clothing a year, which is enough to fill more than 200 Olympic stadiums. And one solution that's often discussed and highlighted is what's called the circular economy. And that means keeping clothing and items like accessories in use longer through repairing, recycling, and reselling. And we see this play out in many forms. This is actually a California retailer. And what they do is they take old shirts, which they collect from around the country, they inspect them, clean them, and then they refashion them and sell them on a store on Instagram. And then we have bigger players like The RealReal. And The RealReal are leaders in the circular economy. They specialize in reselling fashion, jewelry, and even home goods from heritage brands. Their numbers are very impressive, and they're clearly filling a need. According to their latest earnings report, they have 40 million customers, as well as they're on track to hit 700 million in annual revenue. And it's not just resale platforms like The RealReal that is showing us the power of the secondary market. I had an opportunity to speak with Christie's auction house, and the auction houses are seeing these numbers too. According to the head of their department, the handbag division has been seeing growth year over year. They have a steady stream of new buyers, and they are very happy with the strong momentum. And it's a clear signal that strong demand and buyer confidence exists in trusted resale channels like Christie's. And it also shows us that consumers who care about access and authenticity vote very clearly with their dollars. So, what is the problem with circularity? Well, circularity depends on trust. If consumers cannot trust the resale market, and if they're not certain that the item they're buying is actually genuine, then the environmental benefit collapses, which means A true circular economy depends on authenticity because sustainable fashion requires authentic fashion. And you can't meet your environmental goals unless you enforce your IP. So we've covered a lot today, from Birkin bags to ancient Greek sculptures, mascara and upcycling, Chanel and Amazon. And I'd like to conclude with a call to action that we can all participate in, because whether you are a consumer or a brand, there are things that you can do right now. If you're a consumer, I ask you, please choose authenticity, and please also patronize brands that protect their reputation. And if you're a brand, enforce your IP rights. You have the ability to invest in the tools, develop the internal frameworks, monitor and respond to infringement quickly and consistently. And remember that enforcement advances both your brand value and your longevity in competitive markets. The bottom line is that brand control is, yes, a legal issue, but it's also a human issue. Intellectual property truly protects the skills and creativity that fuel every field, from fashion houses to research labs. And because we're all connected, that responsibility to defend IP rights, it doesn't fall on brands alone. It's a collective responsibility. And ultimately, the choice is ours. Do we want to reward imitation, or do we value innovation? To ask the question is to answer it. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Elizabeth. That was so insightful and super engaging. I work with a lot of beauty clients, and I'm really curious about the one case study that did not favor the brand. So I'm wondering if you think there was anything that Benefit or Roller Lash could have done to have won that court case.
Thank you. And thank you for those lovely words. So yes, this was a really interesting case, and basically what it came down to was a couple of things. The court said that Benefit had not provided what's called a consumer survey. And a consumer survey is basically a piece of evidence that you can submit as part of your court case to show that consumers were confused or were not confused. And so one of the things the judge said was that Benefit had had 2 years where this competing product was in the marketplace. They did not submit a consumer survey as part of their evidence. And they also found that the competing product had other cosmetic categories that used a musical theme to it. And so e.l.f. did admit that they had, quote unquote, cued the prestige brand, but they were able to point to things like, we have other products with a musical theme, and our packaging is different enough, the font size was different, the placement of the trademark logo was different. So they would argue these like minute differences, and it actually helped them. So the cases are very fact specific, and I don't read it as a green light on other brands at all.
Hi, Elizabeth. My name is Andrea, and I actually work for a fashion brand. Unfortunately, I don't have a discount code like Louise, so I won't name my brands, but we are currently experiencing something with dupe culture, and there's a debate on whether or not the fight against dupe culture needs a mindset shift. So we've come to find through product studies that these dupes or these counterfeits actually contain harmful toxins, and that some of the running shoes actually cause muscular imbalances. So the question that we have is, do we portray that the sale of dupes and counterfeits isn't actually a victimless crime, or do we start treating these dupe influencers as criminals and taking more severe litigation on that, or does it need a hybrid approach?
You know, that's an excellent question. And I think each brand has the opportunity to decide what is authentic to them in terms of how aggressive do we want to be, what does our enforcement strategy look like. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We certainly have the tools to give us the data that we need, but on a brand level, you decide what type of stance you want to take. And I think it's important to, particularly with AI, we're seeing such a prevalence of duplicates and counterfeits. You now have an opportunity to tell your consumers, this is why we are a better for you product. This is some of the materials we use. This is some of the testing we do. Particularly if you're a skincare product or a fashion product where it's touching your skin, you want to make sure that consumers are protected and safe. And so I do think it's an opportunity to change a challenging situation and talk about why you really are a cut above and a step above your so-called dupe competitor. But it's, it's something I'd be happy to connect with you further as well.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Steve. I am a recovered commercial litigator, but for 12 years I ran government affairs at Universal Studios. We had a similar situation back when DVDs were counterfeited and sold, and people said, "Oh, that's a victimless crime. Somebody's paying $1.50 for a DVD. Let it go." But in fact, the money that flowed through that supported lots of other criminal
Yes.
activities. So I'm just wondering, are you seeing the same thing with handbags and fashion and other activities?
It's hard to know. There are indications that supporting organized crime and other things that none of us really want to support and get involved in. And I think, it depends on the consumer. Some people think it doesn't touch them, right? It's like they're buying a product, they like the look, they want to participate in a culture of aspiration, and they're maybe not thinking about how this is supporting bad actors or organized crime. So yes, that does exist. But in terms of an individual level, people's responses tend to be very different.
We have time for maybe one more question.
You again. As a fellow trademark attorney, I have a couple of questions, but I'll just ask one for now. When Trump announced that he was coming out with the huge tariffs, there was a huge trend on TikTok of creators or factory workers exposing, quote unquote, the true quality of otherwise luxury products. Like you had the factory workers exposing that Lululemon, for instance, they have their leggings that are made for like maybe $3 and they sell them for hundreds. And the same thing with, big luxury brands like a possible Chanel or Louis Vuitton saying that their products are made in Italy when in fact they may be manufactured in other countries. So considering that the quality of brands is openly questioned, why should consumers choose authentic brands over dupes? I love that you talked about the environmental impact, and I think that's a huge factor that a lot of us don't consider, especially if we are greenwashing and talking about sustainability as a virtual signal. But other than that, what are incentives for people to choose the authentic brands over dupes, especially if the quality of the authentic brands is openly being questioned?
That's also a great question. And I really think it comes down to consumer preference and consumer ideology, a lot of it, which is, I have a lot of colleagues who are on the younger end, and a lot of them, they're not bothered by dupe culture. They feel that they are actively and knowingly participating in something, and they have no issues with it. And other people feel differently. So I think quality value is a fluid concept. So it's up to each individual to decide what they feel about the issue and act accordingly. People feel very differently about it. It's a divisive issue.
All right, thank you,
Thank
Elizabeth.
you.